This one is starting page 29, the chapter 1, page 29, from, what is it called? Privilege and poverty? I don't know. Whatever. You know. Keeping these principles in view, we see that the draftsman who, shut up in some dingy office on the banks of the Thames, is drawing the plans for a great marine engine, is in reality devoting his labor to the production of bread and meat, as truly as though he were gardening the grain in California or swinging a lariat on La Plata Pampa, that he is as truly making his own clothing as though he were shearing sheep in Australia or weaving cloth in Paisley, and just as effectually producing the claret he drinks at dinner as though he gathered the grapes on the banks of the Garonne. The miner who 2,000 feet under the ground in the heart of the Comstock is digging out silver ore is, in effect, by virtue of 1,000 exchanges, harvesting crops in valleys 5,000 feet nearer the Earth's center, chasing the whale through the Arctic ice fields, plucking tobacco leaves in Virginia, picking coffee berries in Honduras, cutting sugar cane on the Hawaiian Islands, gathering cotton in Georgia or weaving it in Manchester or Lowell, making quaint wooden toys for his children in the Hartz Mountains, or plucking amid the green and gold of Los Angeles orchards the oranges which when his shift is relieved, he will take home to his sick wife. The wages which he receives on Saturday night at the mouth of the shaft, what are they but the certificate to all the world that he has done these things? The primary exchange in the long series which transmutes his labor into the things he has really been laboring for. All this is clear when looked at in this way, but to meet this fallacy in all its strongholds and lurking places, we must change our investigation from the deductive to the inductive form. Let us now see if, beginning with facts and tracing their relations, we arrive at the same conclusions as are thus obvious when, beginning with first principles, we trace their exemplification into complex facts. Chapter 2, the meaning of the terms. Before proceeding further in our inquiry, let us make sure of the meaning of our terms, for indistinctness is in their use must inevitably produce ambiguity and indeterminateness in reasoning. Not only is it requisite in economic reasoning to give to such words as wealth, capital, rent, wages, and the like a much more definite sense that they bear in common discourse, but unfortunately, even in political economy, there is, as to some of these terms, no certain meaning assigned by common consent, different writers giving to the same term different meanings, and the same writers often using a term in different senses. Nothing can add to the force of what has been said by so many eminent authors as to the importance of clear and precise definitions, save the example, not an infrequent one, of the same authors falling into grave errors from the very cause they warned against. But nothing so shows the importance of language in thought as the spectacle of even acute thinkers basing important conclusions upon the use of the same word in varying senses. I shall endeavor to avoid these dangers. It will be my effort throughout, as any term becomes of importance, to state clearly what I mean by it, and to use it in that sense and in no other. Let me ask the reader to note and to bear in mind the definitions thus given, as otherwise I cannot hope to make myself properly understood. I shall not attempt to attach arbitrary meanings to words or to coin terms, even when it would be convenient to do so, but shall conform to usage as closely as possible, only endeavoring so to fix the meaning of words that they may clearly express thought. What we have now on hand is to discover whether, as a matter of fact, wages are drawn from capital. As a preliminary, let us settle what we mean by wages and what we mean by capital. To the former word, a sufficiently definite meaning has been given by economic writers, but the ambiguities which have attached to the use of the latter in political economy will require a detailed explanation. As used in common discourse, wages means a compensation paid to a hired person for his services, and we speak of one man, quote unquote, working for wages in contrast distinction to another who is, quote unquote, working for himself. The use of the term is still further narrowed by the habit of applying it solely to compensation paid for manual labor. We do not speak of the wages of professional men, managers, or clerks, but of their fees, commissions, or salaries. Thus, the common meaning of the word wages is the compensation paid to a hired person for manual labor. But in political economy, the word wages has a much wider meaning and includes all returns for exertion. For, as political economists explain, the three agents or factors in production are land, labor, and capital, and that part of the produce which goes to the second of these factors is by them styled wages. Thus, the term labor includes all human exertion in the production of wealth, and wages, being that part of the produce which goes into labor, includes all reward for such exertion. There is therefore, in the political economic sense of the term wages, no distinction as to the kind of labor or as to whether its reward is received through an employer or not, but wages means the return received for the exertion of labor, as distinguished from the return received for the use of capital and the return received by the landholder for the use of land. The man who cultivates the soil for himself receives his wages in its produce, just as, if he uses his own capital and owns his land, he may also receive interest and rent. The hunter's wages are the game he kills. The fisherman's wages are the fish he takes. The gold washed out by the self-employing gold digger is as much his wages as the money paid to the hired coal miner by the purchaser of his labor. And as Adam Smith shows, the high profits of retail storekeepers are in large part wages, being the recompense of their labor and not their capital. In short, whatever is received as the result or reward of exertion is wages. This is all it is now necessary to note as to wages, but it is important to keep this in mind, for in the standard economic works, this sense of the term wages is recognized with greater or less clearness, only to be subsequently ignored. But it is more difficult to clear away from the idea of capital the ambiguities that beset it, and to fix the scientific use of the term. In general discourse, all sorts of things that have a value or will yield a return are vaguely spoken of as capital, while economic writers vary so widely that the term can hardly be said to have a fixed meaning. Let us compare with each other the definitions of a few representative writers. Quote, that part of a man's stock, quote, says Adam Smith, Book 2, Chapter 1, which he expects to afford him a revenue, is called his capital, and the capital of a country or society, he goes on to say, consists of 1. Machines and instruments of trade which facilitate and abridge labor. 2. Buildings, not mere dwellings, but which may be considered instruments of trade, such as shops, farmhouses, etc. 3. Improvements of land which better fit it for tillage or culture. 4. The acquired and useful abilities of all the inhabitants. 5. Money, 6. Provisions in which the hands of producers and dealers, from the sale of which they expect to derive profit. 7. The material of or partially completed manufactured articles still in the hands of producers or dealers. 8. Completed articles still in the hands of producers or dealers. The first 4 of these he styles fixed capital, and the last 4 circulating capital, a distinction of which is not necessary to our purpose to take any note. Ricardo's definition is, quote, capital is a part of the wealth of a country which is employed in production and consists of food, clothing, tools, raw materials, machinery, etc., necessary to give effect to labor, end quote. This definition, it will be seen, is very different from that of Adam Smith, as it excludes many of the things which he includes, as acquired talents, articles of mere taste or luxury in the possession of producers or dealers, and includes some things he excludes, such as food, clothing, etc., in the possession of the consumer. McCulloch's definition is, quote, the capital of a nation really comprises all those portions of the produce of industry existing in it that may be directly employed either to support human existence or facilitate production, end quote. This definition follows the line of Ricardo's, but is wider. While it excludes everything that is not capable of aiding production, it includes everything that is so capable without reference to actual use or necessity for use. The horse drawing a pleasure carriage, according to McCulloch's view, as he expressly states, as much capital to the horse drawing a plow, because he may, if need arises, be used to draw a plow. John Stuart Mill, following the same general line as Ricardo and McCulloch, make neither the use nor the capability of use, but the determination to use the test of capital. He says, quote, whether things are destined to supply productive labor with the shelter, protection, tools, and materials which the work requires, and to feed and otherwise maintain the laborer during the process, are capital, end quote. These quotations sufficiently illustrate the divergence of the masters. Among minor authors, the variance is still greater, as a few examples will suffice to show. Professor Wayland, whose, quote, Elements of Political Economy, end quote, has long been a favorite textbook in American educational institutions where there has been any pretense of teaching political economy, gives this lucid definition, quote, the word capital is used in two senses. In relation to product, it means any substance on which industry is to be exerted. In relation to industry, the material on which industry is about to confer value, that on which it has conferred value, the instruments which are used for the conferring of value, as well as the means of sustenance by which the being is supported while he is engaged in performing the operations, end quote. Henry C. Carey, the American apostle of protectionism, defines capital as, quote, the instrument by which man obtains mastery over nature, including in it the physical and mental powers of man himself, end quote. Professor Perry, a Massachusetts free trader, very popularly objects to this, that it hopelessly confuses the boundaries between capital and labor, and then himself hopelessly confuses the boundaries between capital and land by defining capital as, quote, any valuable thing outside of man himself from whose use springs a pecuniary increase or profit, end quote. An English economic writer of high standing, Mr. W.M. Thornton, begins an elaborate examination of the relations of labor and capital on labor by stating that he will include land with capital, which is very much as if one who proposed to teach algebra should begin with a declaration that he would consider the signs plus and minus as meaning the same thing and having the same value. An American writer, also of high standing, Professor Francis A. Walker, makes the same declaration in his elaborate book on the wages question. Another English writer, Anne A. Nicholson, The Science of Exchanges, London, 1873, seems to cap the climax of absurdity by declaring in one paragraph that, quote, capital must, of course, be accumulated by saving, end quote, and that in the very next paragraph stating that, quote, the land which produces a crop, the plow which turns the soil, the labor which secures the produce, and the produce itself is a material if a material profit is to be derived from its employment, are all alike capital. But how land and labor are to be accumulated by saving them, he nowhere condescends to explain. In the same way, a standard American writer, Professor Amos Walker, Science of Wealth, first declares that capital arises from the net savings of labor, and then immediately afterwards declares that land is capital. I might go on for pages citing contradictory and self-contradictory definitions, but it would only weary the reader. It is necessary to multiply quotations. Those already given are sufficient to show how wide a difference exists as to the comprehension of the term capital. Anyone who wants further illustration of the confusion, worse confounded, which exists on the subject among the professors of political economy may find it in any library where the works of these professors are ranged side by side. Now, it makes little difference what name we give to things if when we use the name we always keep in view the same things and not others. But the difficulty arising in economic reasoning from these vague and varying definitions of capital is that it only in the premises of reasoning that the term is used in the peculiar sense assigned by the definition, while in the practical conclusions that are reached, it is always used, or at least it is always understood, in one general and definite sense. When, for instance, it is said that wages are drawn from capital, the word capital is understood in the same sense as when we speak of the scarcity or abundance, the increase or decrease, the destruction or increment of capital, a commonly understood and defined sense which separates capital from other factors of production, land and labor, and also separates it from things like things used merely for gratification. In fact, most people understand well enough what capital is until they begin to define it, and I think their works will show that the economic writers who differ so widely in their definitions use the term in this commonly understood sense in all cases except their definitions and the reasoning based on them. That's pretty funny. The common sense of the term is that of wealth devoted to procuring more wealth. Dr. Adam Smith correctly expresses this common idea when he says, quote, that part of a man's stock which he expects to afford him revenue is called his capital, and that capital of a community is evidently the sum of such individual stocks, or that part of the aggregate stocks which is expected to produce more wealth. This also is the derivative sense of the term. The word capital, as philologists trace it, comes down to us from a time when wealth was estimated in cattle and a man's income depended upon the number of head he could keep for their increase. The difficulty which beset the use of the word capital as an exact term, and which are even more strikingly exemplified in current political and social discussions than in definitions of economic writers, arise from two facts. First, that certain classes of things, the possession of which to the individual is precisely equivalent to the possession of capital, are not part of the capital of the community. And second, that things of the same kind may or may not be capital according to the purpose to which they are devoted. With a little care as to these points, there should be no difficulty in obtaining a sufficiently clear and fixed idea of what the term capital is generally used properly includes, such as an idea as will enable us to say what things are capital and what are not, and to use the word without ambiguity or slip. Land, labor, and capital are the three factors of production. If we remember that capital is thus a term used in contradistinction to land and labor, we at once see that nothing properly included under either one of these terms can be properly classed as capital. The term land necessarily includes not merely the surface of the earth as distinguished from the water and the air, but the whole material universe outside of man himself, for it is only by having access to land, from which his very body is drawn, that man can come in contact with or use nature. The term land embraces, in short, all natural materials, forces, and opportunities, and therefore nothing that is freely supplied by nature can be properly classed as capital. A fertile field, a rich vein of ore, a falling stream which supplies power, may give to the possessor advantages equivalent to the possession of capital, but to class such things as capital would be to put an end to the distinction between land and capital, and so far as they relate to each other, to make the two terms meaningless. The term labor, in like manner, includes all human exertion, and hence human powers, whether natural or acquired, can never properly be classed as capital. In common parlance, we often speak of a man's knowledge, skill, or industry as constituting his capital, but this is evidently a metaphorical use of language that must be eschewed in reasoning that aims at exactness. Superiority in such qualities may augment the income of an individual just as capital would, but an increase in the knowledge, skill, or industry of a community may have the same effect in increasing its production as would an increase of capital. But this effect is due to the increased power of labor and not to capital. Increased velocity may give to the impact of a cannonball the same effect as increased weight. Yet, nevertheless, weight is the one thing and velocity the other. This is page 38.